So ancient Near Eastern cultures viewed the world very differently than we do now. By ancient Near Eastern, I mean the Hebrew cultures and the Canaanites and the Egyptians and the Babylonians, the various cultures that we read about in the Old Testament. They viewed the universe as being flat, first of all. They thought the earth was flat. They did not know it was round. And they thought that the earth had a solid sky dome. And they thought that the sun traveled through that sky once a day. The sun was not stationary at the center. Earth was stationary and flat, and the sun traveled. Now, that solid sky dome sounds very strange to us today because we know that the atmosphere is gaseous and that clouds form and precipitation happens, and that's where rain comes from. Well, in ancient times, they thought that rain came from an ocean that was above that solid sky dome. So there'd be openings in it, and the rain would come through floodgates of heaven and rain on the earth. After all, the sky looks blue, water looks blue, so it kind of makes sense. And then they viewed there also being waters under the earth, and that's where the netherworld was, and waters would occasionally come up from under the earth in the form of springs. That was their physical picture of the universe. Now, the other cultures surrounding the ancient Hebrews had gods for each aspect of this universe. In this Egyptian engraving, they have the god of the sky. It has stars all over it. They have the god of the air. He's holding a symbol of life. They have the god of the ground with leaves on their body, and the sun god and the god of the netherworld. There's gods for all these different aspects of the world. The Babylonians similarly had gods for all the different aspects of the world. So that's the context in which Genesis 1 and other Old Testament passages were written. And what they continually affirm is that there is only one God, not many, and that one God is sovereign over all of these physical aspects of the world, and that the sun, the sky, the land are just physical created things. They are not gods. They're not inhabited by gods. And that was a major message of Genesis 1 for the original audience. They had been living and surrounded by these cultures. And so then to hear this message of one sovereign God must have been very striking to them. And that was really what Genesis 1 was communicating to them. And also the goodness of creation and the role of humanity in creation as being the crowning element, being very good at the end of the story, rather than kind of an afterthought at the end of the story and just being there to be slaves to gods and serve at their banquets like it is in some of the Babylonian creation stories. So that contrast is what must have really impressed the original hearers of Genesis 1, and I believe, therefore, is the main message we should be drawing from Genesis 1 today. It's a message of how God interacts with his creation and of our role in creation. It's several key theological messages, but it is not a message about the how and the when of creation. God didn't bother to teach the ancient Hebrews that the world was actually round. Didn't bother to teach them that it was actually atmosphere in the sky instead of a solid sky dome. He let them keep believing that. He accommodated the message to where they were at. And I find that so comforting to us today that God is willing to accommodate his message to our limited understanding. We don't have to have a perfect scientific understanding of the world to get God's message for us. And for that reason, I don't think we need to draw from Genesis 1 a chronology of how God created, a timeline of specific physical events, but rather these very important theological views of our